Hi there, Liron here. I hope you're doing well, and I want to thank you for joining me in this video. Today, I will present you with what I believe is one of my best paintings so far, and consequentially, this is also one of my best processes so far. But this will not be a painting tutorial. You'll get to see most of the process, but I won't describe the specifics. If you are interested in a complete painting tutorial for this process, rest assured, I will post such a video in the near future. But this time, instead, I will share with you my innermost thoughts and feelings as of late. These are things I never shared before so fully, and I feel like it is time. You might have noticed I've been quieter lately. The lessons are going out, but there's something different. The person I am is changing and maturing. I won't bury the lead. The past 12 months have been the most challenging time of my life thus far. I've been feeling things very intensely and dealing with a lot of anger, sadness, grief, but also hope. Yes, this video may sound negative at the outset, but if you stay with me till the end, there is a glimmer of hope to be found. In fact, this glimmer has the potential of expanding into a warm, blinding sunshine of freedom and joy. Back in 2023, I shared a painting with you under the title, The Reality of Realistic Watercolor Painting. This was a colorful scene I took a picture of in our old Tel Aviv apartment's kitchen. I was really inspired by how the light from the window hit the different elements on the counter. You have the chromatic, reflective surface of the kettle, the blocky, weighty mortar and pestle, and the transparent oil and vinegar bottle. Together, these created a wonderful, pleasant painting which quite naively managed to capture the scene realistically, but with a scarce amount of details when observed up close. Now, in 2024, my intuition has brought me to paint a bit of a different version of this scene. Some of my naivete is gone, and I was driven to capture the smallest of details I could observe. There are some things one cannot unsee, and the details embedded within this painting are a byproduct of this. Once seen, I couldn't exclude these. This includes the tiniest of reflections, the gentlest nuances of transition from light to dark and back, the mildest value changes, as will later be expressed in what little foliage exists inside the frame. And the result is a solidness one cannot ignore. On the colors front, things have been feeling quite dim. It feels to me like some rug has been pulled from underneath me, like someone turned off the color functionality, leaving behind a somewhat bleak, inescapable, yet vivid reality. It is hard to unpack everything I'm about to, mostly because it's true, which makes it quite exposing as well. For the longest time, I've felt like an outsider in my life. I felt like I have always seen things differently, and that things that burned within me were difficult to communicate to the outside. In what feels like past life, I have often felt a complete disregard and invalidation of my feelings and ideas. Quite often, fully expressing how I felt about something has resulted in a total crashing into a brick wall of apathy, lack of understanding, and disrespect. This is almost hard to remember because I've been incredibly blessed in the past decade or so. I am now able to communicate freely, both in my personal life and in my work, which is very difficult to even describe as work, as I get to play with what I love and be my own boss. But to fully understand where I'm at, it's useful to understand just how much of an outsider I've been for the first 2/3 of my life, as well as the residues of that. As a small child, I was mesmerized by American sitcoms. I grew up watching Family Matters, Full House, Who's the Boss, Student Body, and many more. And soon enough, I could understand most of what was being said without reading the subtitles. For a shy kid like me, This was an escape from a world and a society I had a hard time to connect with. Looking back now, I know I wasn't a victim. No one turned me into an outcast. Rather, I was naturally shy and withdrawn. But it didn't feel that way at the time. The culture I grew up in, Israel in the 90s, was a huge melting pot of cultures. It is probably one of the more diverse and misunderstood countries in the world. For some context, my father was born in Romania and came here in the early 70s, while my grandparents on my mother's side came from Iraq during the early 50s. Most people who came here were experiencing some form of persecution in their home countries. And to me, certain clashing cultural elements of straightforwardness, assertiveness, success, and ego were hard to deal with. I was more of a timid, gentle kid. As an aside, 3 decades later, after trying out jiu-jitsu, I really feel like I rediscovered something I never knew was there. And despite it being a relatively short-lived experience due to a knee injury, I learned a lot, and I may go back to that in the future once I feel more confident. But back to the 90s, specifically late 90s. This is when anime became widely popular in Israel, and just like many other kids all over the world, I had no idea I was even watching anime to begin with. All I knew was I really enjoyed Pokemon, Sakura the Card Captor, Dragon Ball Z, and Beyblade. Watching American sitcoms and Japanese anime, and developing my own internal artistic world, these greatly contributed to my feeling of loneliness and of being an outsider. I never felt very connected to my peers. And as the years flew by, I always felt more like a citizen of the world rather than Israeli or Jewish. Don't get me wrong, we celebrated the traditions, had lots of family get-togethers around the holidays, and my grandpa used to do the Kiddush every Friday. And for my bar mitzvah, I read my entire parasha in the synagogue. Religion was inescapable, and really, I wasn't even trying to escape it. I'm quite agnostic when it comes to religions. I don't really mind them, and have zero cynicism towards them. Whatever makes you feel good, as long as you aren't hurting anyone else, I'm happy for you. But inside, I always felt a strong kinship to the world in general, and perhaps even a stronger kinship with the US due to the strong influence of said American sitcoms in my childhood. Not to mention, I got to visit twice as a kid, as I have some dear family members living there. Another huge contributing factor was technology. As it continued growing exponentially, the internet in particular changed everything. I felt more connected than ever. I even had quite a few pen pals from all over the world, back when that was a thing. And I also spent quite some time in ancient forums ASLing every day with the few friends I had. As I began reaching adulthood, these feelings never fully went away. To a large extent, I still felt like somewhat of an outsider in my own country and culture. But the one thing that softened this separation and blurred some of the lines was the mandatory military service in the IDF. For me, it was from age 18 to 23. This was the first time I got to experience a different environment with completely new people. This is, in fact, where the average Israeli gets to meet people from all over the country. And for outsiders like me, it was an opportunity to, for the first time, and completely by chance, meet people with whom I did share common interests. And that's exactly what happened. I wasn't a fighter in the military. In fact, in some of the early interviews they conducted, I pleaded not to be one. It's not my personality, and I knew it would be miserable for me. I was fortunate enough to get a meaningful office job and meet some wonderful people. I flourished, and these years ended up being incredibly formative. After my military services ended, like many others, I took a long vacation abroad and visited South America. I spent time in Peru, Bolivia, Argentina, Chile, and Brazil. For me, it felt great to mingle with the locals as much as possible, though I did have some great Israeli friends with me on some of the journey. But this solidified it for me. I'm a man of the world. To me, Israel was a small, limited province. The world had options and the potential for greatness. And so when the time came to decide what I wanted to do with my life, it was the perfect storm. I loved art. I loved teaching. My English was dang good. and the internet was eating up the world. Why would I ever limit myself to just Israel? I wanted to go international. I'm gonna be an internationally renowned artist. One would think that that kind of a thing would lead me to pack my bags and move abroad, perhaps to New York or LA, but my constitution wasn't really built for that. I wanted to stay close to family and friends, and despite feeling quite detached from the overall Israeli culture, I liked it here. Tel Aviv is a wonderful city, and as I was maturing, the world around me became warmer and more inviting. And so, the next best thing was to always be internationally oriented with my business. I started doing this officially back in 2014, and still going somewhat strong in 2024, a decade later. Throughout the years, I have communicated here with people from all over the world. I grew to love people. I don't care where you're from. Israel has a lot of enemies, but such squabbles are beneath me. If you show me respect, I will show you respect. During my travels to South America and other vacations to Europe and the US, I met people from all walks of life. I interacted with people from so-called enemy nations. I met Iranians, Syrians, Palestinians, Egyptians, and Lebanese people, not to mention people from just about any other continent. I especially remember a nice boat ride to a beautiful Azul cave site in Chile with a group of 8, including a Palestinian woman. We had a long conversation that ended in a handshake and hope for a better future for everyone we care about. I dove into deep conversations with many others and learned what the experience was like from other points of view. And whatever your point of view is, I respect it. I may completely disagree, or my own experience may be very different, but I have zero interest in changing your mind. It just doesn't appeal to me. In fact, I often find ideological arguments to be completely boring. The fascinating bit for me is when the human that was before the ideology was installed shows their true self. In this channel too, I have a strong aversion to trying to convince you a certain process is better than another, to lay down the rules, to dictate what's correct and incorrect in art. I myself don't have a strong opinion of what is and isn't correct. Who am I to know? And so I have no interest in telling others. I'm merely here as a, hopefully, catalyst for inspiration and self-discovery for you. And I think this is a good summary of where I was prior to October 7th, 2023. When one perceives reality one way, but the actual reality is wildly different, it never ends well. Because the real reality always comes knocking. The more one is blindsided, the worse the reality's visit is. Throughout my 3.5 decades of living on this earth, I have received several reminders that I am, in fact, Israeli, and that I am, in fact, living in a different reality than many of those I feel kinship towards. But I think I did a decent job in letting these instances pass by me with minimal damage. My mental state wasn't affected by them to a large degree. Yes, things were occasionally sad and scary for a while, but I was unaffected long term. Now, the term I just used, instances, would be minimizing it, as I'm referring to, let's call it, terrible acts that humanity is capable of. And trust me, I know best that I'm not the only one who lives in such a reality. I'm not trying to minimize anyone else's experience. I hope this is clear by everything I shared so far, including the lengthy tale of my childhood and adolescence. What people from the West don't understand is just how harsh reality is here. You can probably understand by my pronunciation how strange it feels for me to even say the West. I feel like the West. To me, this is a Western country. But it isn't. And despite being reminded of that time and time again, I still didn't see it that way. I still felt like a citizen of the world, with connections all over. But the reality, as I mentioned, is rough. Life will feel normal for a while, until it won't. Your existence is completely modern, until it isn't. Heck, when I was 1 month old, my family had to run for shelter during the Gulf War. From what I hear, I pretty much screamed my lungs out. These experiences don't simply disappear. They are coded into the very being of every person going through them. It could be losing a loved one. It could be experiencing an act of terror yourself. It could be a friend who's currently kidnapped. We are a technology powerhouse with many startups and a strong presence of big tech. But then we are reminded we're a provincial, semi-third world country. And October 7th, 2023, was when I first experienced, as viscerally as possible, just how everything I thought about myself was being torn to shreds. I'm not a citizen of the world. Others most certainly don't see me this way. I'm an Israeli. I live in the Middle East. Once every couple of hours or even minutes, an alarm goes off and we have to run for shelter. Sometimes I hear something that vaguely sounds like an alarm and immediately stop what I'm doing as my heart rate goes up, only to discover it was an ambulance, or a dog howling, or a door creaking. Most people here have an app that sends notifications when rockets are launched to your region, giving you about 30 to 60 seconds to get into a safe space. It has a different sound than the normal notifications, and Ruth immediately perks up when she hears it. This is a dog who never reacts to any sound coming from a phone or any other electrical device. She can't recognize our voices through the phone or an intercom, but when this sound comes up, she immediately goes on high alert. I can't imagine how I would feel if something happened to her. To many, what's going on here is a conflict in the desert somewhere. That's a direct quote, by the way. Things are very hard on a national level. This is viewed as the lowest point of this country when it comes to morale, unity, and a feeling of safety. And if you've ever spent a while here, you know how complex reality is. You know how diverse the people are. You've seen the signs everywhere, in English, Hebrew, and Arabic. You know some places that are the epitome of coexistence, and others are not, to say the least. And with how I am, to the full extent in which I described it to you earlier, things were not only hard on a national level, but also extremely difficult on a personal level. Who am I? Why do all of these people who I previously considered friends hate me now? They never even met me, yet they assume the worst on a personal level. How come terrible things happen and people are celebrating them? When these people are judged by their actions, the very thing they claim to be with their words crumbles to dust. The thing that really hit hard with this event is how it could quite literally have been me. These are young people going to a party, or people visiting their families. About a year ago, I could have simply vanished one day. There would be 0 videos, 0 updates, nothing. No one would ever hear from me again. And I have to continue living, knowing this could very well happen in the future. And it is still happening as we speak. Every day more bad news comes out. Not just bad, horrible. Can I even complain? Some people are suffering much worse than me. Do I have the right to pause my life for 1 second, even though others depend on me? Do I have the right to continue my life normally, even for a second, while others are suffering so badly? All of it is still quite painful. There's also this unclear, vague sense of betrayal and gaslighting from the world to some extent. But what right do I even have to complain for even a second? I will mention, however, that I have also received a plethora of kind comments and messages. For that, I thank you so much. One of the most painful things isn't even seeing the hatred out there. It's opening the YouTube app and seeing everything going on as usual. All the channels I love about art, pop culture, comedy, and vlogging are doing their thing, and it all feels pointless. Complete apathy and lack of interest in my heart. This all looks like a clown show. Who cares? And every time someone complains about the least significant of things, feeling great disdain. Who cares someone got your order wrong? Who cares you woke up with no inspiration? What's the point? This has been going on for a while. There are bouts of anger, frustration, and a feeling of powerlessness. Then when these calm, there's just apathy. Once every couple of days, there's a surge of inspiration, and I ride that wave. I make an incredible painting. And once I'm done, I feel like doing absolutely nothing for hours. Sometimes I cry. There's a lot of pent-up energy with no real outlet. There are some outlets, but they can barely channel through them the sheer amount of trauma and crap. I consider myself to be somewhat emotionally and spiritually developed. If I'm having it this hard, what is everyone else around me dealing with? It's very hard not to hate and despise your enemies. It's very easy to divide the world into friend and foe, almost indiscriminately. It's easy to hate the world and existence itself, and within it, everyone who hurt you, wronged you, and made you suffer. But I also hate the idea of becoming such a person. I don't want to be a wimp, but to live an existence of hatred is a torture. It's almost like letting your enemy win and have complete power over you. And if there's a chance, a slim one, that karma exists, that everything described in any spiritual text has some merit to it, I would really not want to be that person. I would not like to inflict further pain. And from a practical standpoint, I'd much prefer solving a problem for good. This has all been quite bleak, but I needed to put it out there. Quite frankly, I didn't even plan for these thoughts to accompany this particular video. It almost feels like I'm wasting a wonderful painting process on this monologue. But the words started pouring out and I couldn't do anything to stop them. I have no idea how people will respond. I'm sure many will be supportive, but perhaps some may dislike or even hate me for this. I'm not quite sure what will happen when this goes out. But this was burning a hole inside of me, and I simply had to put it out there. When it's this big, it's important for me to have you know what I'm going through on a personal level. Now for the silver lining, the glimmer of hope. I'm extremely fortunate to have 3 things in life. People I care about that care about me, art, and the constitution I was born with. If it wasn't for these, things would have been quite different. There is also an advantage to growing, maturing, and losing some of your innocence. The advantage is to truly know, to know the truth, to know how reality actually is, and with more sober eyes, to be able to make the best decisions. The ones that lead to the desired future, the ones that lead to joy, and above all, freedom. And it indeed appears my interest in freedom is slowly growing, while my interest in anger and frustration is starting to wear thin. Once we settled into this apartment, after moving twice already, things have calmed. Going back to working out at the gym was also huge. I feel a certain degree of peace. I'm still sad. I'm still all over the place with my emotions. And every time bad news comes out, it's hard for a while. But it's a lot more contained, and I don't have to exert as much effort containing it. I let it come and go, and somehow manage to keep going. I'm able to verbalize more of what I'm feeling, and the feeling of hopelessness is gradually fading. It's very gradual, but it is happening. They say a person always defaults back to their default. And while this event and time period will undoubtedly leave a permanent scar on me and many others, I think I'll also default back to my default. The feeling of anger and fear will subside, and perhaps some of the person I was before will come back. I do have to mention that many won't have this privilege. The number of people who lost their lives, their loved ones, their hope is immeasurable. The number of people who were simply erased from existence is terrifying. This is something I'll never stop thinking about. It is a burden to bear for the rest of my life. But compared to their experience, this burden is perhaps only as heavy as a feather. Thank you for listening till the end. My intention is to always leave you better than I found you at the start of a video. I hope I haven't failed you with this one. I wish for us to soon meet here again for a joyful painting experience. Thank you.